Good afternoon, everyone. I pray all is well. I hope and pray that I'm able to get through this presentation with my voice. I've been having some issues with my voice, and therefore I've been going back and forth to the doctor regarding some issues with my voice. But this evening I want to present. I'm going to be presenting the narrative metaphor and social constructionism. Uh, According to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. What ties humanity in that inescapable network of mutuality? I think it's stories. Stories helps to shape reality by answering the questions of identity, purpose, belonging, and destiny. Who I am and what I am to become can only be answered with the story. Stories unite, shape, connect, confine, liberate, hurt, and heal us. Therefore, effective pastoral care warrants understanding stories, especially the metaphors that enable us to conceptualize ourselves, others, and the world. First, I want to talk to you all about understanding the metaphors and their importance. The Cambridge Dictionary defines a metaphor as an expression that describes a person or an object by referring to something that is considered to possess similar characteristics. Paul Thibodeau, Tini Matlock, and Stephen Flushberg argue that metaphors both reflect underlying conceptual structures and processes and shape how people think. Studying metaphors can therefore lead to a better understanding of the relationship between language and thought. The metaphors of narrative and social construction are the building blocks of narrative therapy, which does not seek to establish global accounts of life and universal categories of human nature by constructing naturalized and essentialist notions of the self, and finds no cause or reason to diagnose or label a person's experience. Using the narrative metaphor leads us to think about people's lives as stories and to work with them to experience life in stories that are meaningful and fulfilling. Using the metaphor of social construction leads us to also consider the ways in which every person's social interpersonal reality has been constructed through interaction with other human beings and human institutions, and to focus on the influence of social realities on the meaning of people's lives. Narrative and social construction are influential guiding metaphors that can negatively and positively impact therapy. Found in guiding metaphors, number one, are structure. Historically, structure calls practitioners to perceive families as rigid, geometric, and arrangements of people. This led to the oversimplification of complex interaction and promoted generalizations, and it caused practitioners to ignore continuous changes in a family's associations. The second founding guiding metaphor was systems. Systems promotes a dialogue about the processes by which people connect in transcendent patterns. Systems sometimes tempted to cause therapists to look within families for complementary circuits and for collaborative causations of problems rather than to work with family members to identify the negative influence of certain values, institutions, and practices in the larger culture on their lives and relationships, and to invite them to pull together in opposing those values, institutions, and practices. And it also encouraged neutrality. So, in other words, that systems, the critique behind systems, it created a disconnect between therapists and clients. As the narrative metaphor and social constructionism began to develop, it first developed with the cybernetic paradigm. Cybernetics was founded by Gregory Bateson, but was coined by Norbert Wiener, who defined it as a body of knowledge about structure and flow in information processing. As a guiding metaphor, cybernetics refer to when intention therapy was or was not on target. Strategic cybernetic systems therapists focus on how families could become stuck in a repetitive loop of unfulfilling behavior or a hierarchical structures that were improperly balanced, and on what therapists could do to interrupt those patterns and guide families into a healthy rather than a unhealthy stability. In other words, they were focused on determining why certain people got confined into cycles of behavior, cycles of abuse and whatnot. In cybernetics, the cybernetic paradigm was broken down into the first and second order of cybernetics. The first order invited therapists to view families as machines, which was quite dismissive because it caused therapists to perceive clients as thermostats, guided missiles, or computers, which caused therapists to become oppressive and detached. Therapists became focused on interventions as goals, and they began to identify and treat dysfunction, and they became focused with identifying and treating dysfunction and labeling people as wrong. So we can see how oppressive the first order of cybernetics truly was. The second order of cybernetics developed because therapists couldn't make objective assessments and interventions while being disconnected from families. So we see that the second order of cybernetics tried to improve on some of the failures of the first order. As the metaphors changed, therapists started to discuss the systematic changes of families in terms of biological and ecological systems. The ecological systems paradigm identified a family as a co-evolutionary ecosystem located in an evolutionary time and space. One critique of the cybernetics was provided by the feminists, who argued that such models ignored the larger social, historical, and cultural context in which men had much more political, financial, and moral power than women, which we're going to see how the narrative metaphor and the social constructionism started to address some of those disparities. The evolution toward the narrative metaphor and social constructionism began with the Milan team. The Milan team, aka the Milan Systemic Family Therapy team, taught and the prototypical model of cybernetics in family therapy. They focus on patterns of meaning and identifying the preposition of myths that influence a family's actions. They created circular questions, which presuppose that family members were connected in ongoing relationships, that the actions and emotions of one person affected everyone else in recursive ways. Circular questions were transformative in their day because they compel family members to see their interconnectedness of how feelings and actions impacted all. Circular questions also promoted collaboration between supervisors and subordinate therapists with the development of T and O teams. The T teams were designed and had the responsibility to assist the therapist and focus on a family's hypothesis and the appropriateness of effectiveness interventions. Effectiveness of interventions. The O team will observe all of the family, the therapist, and the T team's interactions. They also analyze the hypothesis of a family on 3 levels, which are the following: a family system, a family and therapist system, and a family therapist and team system. The Milan team also promoted collaboration between therapists and families and helped one to see that the sense of control over outcomes needed to be rejected to focus on the co-evolving relationship between clients and therapists. So now we're seeing how we're moving more into a place where we're building a therapeutic relationship between clients and their their therapists. Milton Eckerson was a influential figure in the development of the narrative metaphor and social constructionism, or the narrative therapy approach. But Milton Eckerson, he wasn't a proponent of system metaphors, and he approached therapy from a pragmatic and an anti-theocratical point of view. He favored empowering clients to make their own decisions regarding their outcomes and believed that a therapist's job was to listen and understand clients' feelings and experience. He appreciated people and viewed them as resourceful. He also established a therapeutic relationship with clients that de-emphasized the ingrained ideas from a therapist's profession and academic understandings, which perceived clients as science experiments. Eckerson teaching tales personifies his therapeutic approach because they utilize stories to expand and enrich a client's story, because he believed the stories help to shape reality. So we're starting to see the beginning of the importance of stories. Eckerson utilized the principle of alternative experiential realities in his therapy and teaching. He told stories of the Tairoma Indians and the Balinese people and other people in other places to suggest, among others, the idea that one need not to be limited by their belief system that one is born to. In other words, he would take a story like the story of Roots, and to show that we are not defined to stories of slavery, stories of racism, that we have the capabilities to re-alter, to reimagine our stories. The beginning of the narrative metaphor and social constructionism started with this idea that it should not be perceived as a discontinuous paradigm or a different language, but as a evolution, instead of a evolution of a systems theory. In other words, it should be perceived, as I corrected myself, as a discontinuous paradigm instead of an evolution of a system theory. It's often referred to as postmodernism. It was somewhat coined by Michael White, who was persuaded by David Epstein to use the narrative metaphor or the story analogy. Michael White was also an influential figure initially at the beginning of this therapeutic approach. White was influenced by Gregory Bateson, who used the map metaphor to denote how knowledge was transmitted through mental maps of external or objective reality that leads to different realities. Therefore, maps are relative and limited in details. Scholars in humanities and the social scientists, my background, had been using narrative as an organizing metaphor for several years prior to it being used in family therapy circles. Social constructionism is founded on the notion that beliefs, value, institutions, labels, laws, divisions of labor, etc., make up our social realities that are constructed by the members of a culture as they interact with one another from generation to generation. Societies construct these lenses through which their members interpret the world. The realities that each of us take for granted are the realities that our societies have surrounded us with since birth. In other words, how we perceive one another. These social constructs of women, of gender, race, etc. They govern how we perceive one another and ourselves. Social constructionists argue that the experience of the self is in a constant state of change because the self is constantly creating itself through narratives that include people that are interwoven into the narratives of others. The narrative and social constructionism guiding metaphors impacts how family therapists act and think, because family therapists now seek to avoid oppressing clients like in the past. They are now committed to being more accountable to avoid past misunderstandings. Family therapists perceive themselves as members of a subculture in collaborative social interaction with other people to construct new realities. Family therapists help clients to notice the influence of restrictive cultural societies in their lives and to expand and enrich their own life narratives. Family therapists seek to find new ways to advertise individual success to create narratives of success that fuse and satisfies society. Narrative metaphor constructionism is often compared to postmodernism. Postmodernism is a Western philosophy of the late 20th century movement that is characterized by broad skepticism, subjectivism, relativism, a general suspicion of reason, and an acute sensitivity to the role of ideology in asserting and maintaining political and economic power. Postmodernists believe that there are limits on the ability of human beings to measure and describe the universe in any precise, absolute, and universal manner. The importance of a postmodern worldview are the following. Kinds are dehumanized when they are approached as objects regarding their truth and experiences. Adopting a postmodern narrative, social constructionist worldview offers useful ideas about how people, knowledge, and truth are negotiated in families and larger cultural aggregations. A postmodern worldview holds that beliefs, laws, social customs, habits, and etc. make up our psychological fabric of reality from social interactions. There are four ideals that undergird our postmodern worldview. Realities are, number one, socially constructed. Number two, realities are constituted through language. Number three, realities are organized and maintained through narrative. Number four, narratives are no essential truths. Reality is the most important worldview that impacts the narrative and its constructionism metaphor. According to David Pear, there has been a gradual and incomplete of the following three beliefs. Reality is knowable. We are prisoners of our perceptions. Knowledge arises within communities because we negotiate realities with others. And the narrative metaphor is founded on this notion that knowledge arises within communities of knowers. The following three processes govern the way social groups maintain and constructs knowledge regarding reality. Typification. Typification is a process through which people sort their perceptions into types of classes. Our realities are constituted through networks of typifications. Institutionalization is the process through which institutions arise around sets of typification, like the institution of motherhood, fatherhood, marriage, law, and etc. Institutionalization helps families and societies maintain and disseminate hard-won knowledge, but blinds one of other possibilities. Legitimation is the third one, because and it refers to those processes that give legitimacy to institutions and typifications of particular societies. Realities can be constructed through biology as well as language. The biology of perception, which is our system, the nervous system. Our nervous system interprets external stimuli and provide and assigns meaning. So if I touch hot water, my nervous system is what's going to make me feel as though that water is hot or cold. Some believe that biology and helps to determine reality. And a society constructs reality through language, because worlds can only be experienced, understood, and shared through language. And this proves the following. Speaking isn't neutral or passive, because realities are created and validated every time one speaks. Languages are shared activities. And number three, what is important here for psychotherapists is that change, whether it be change of belief, relationship, feeling, or self-concept, involves a change in language. In other words, in order for me to change, in order for my world to change, my language must change. I must change the way I perceive, the way I articulate, the way I describe myself, the way I describe others, the way I describe the world, and the way when my language changes, then that suggests that I have changed, because our language is suggestive of the reality that we reside in. Therefore, the mutability of language is important, because precise meaning of any word is kind of indeterminate and potentially different that can be negotiated from person to person. Realities are also built through stories. Narratives influence how we ascribe meaning and importance to particular life events. Narratives carry hurtful meanings and present difficult stories that can be altered by highlighting different unstoried events or by retelling previously told stories. In other words, for instance, the story, our stories of our past experiences, we are not defined to that story. We have the power to retell, to reimagine, because we are constantly authoring or writing our story. Experience can only be interpreted because of the endless possibilities of interpretations, which does not mean that one interpretation is untrue. So that means that there's no way to validate. There's no way to assign validity towards an interpretation, because all interpretations are outside of the realm of truthfulness. Therefore, the self is socially constructed through language and is maintained through narrative. The self is a process of or an activity that occurs in the space of experience instead of a thing inside of ourselves. And so I'm myself, who I am as myself, is not in me. It's a process that's taking place. And I think that makes more sense to me than what I have previously been told about the id and the ego and etc. A postmodern worldview helps to compare social constructs and narratives. Narrative therapists are focused on issues of deciding, choosing, and of examining the effect of choices through the following: by making useful beliefs and values, by understanding the beliefs that support people's problems, by inquiring about the development and history of beliefs and their social constructions, and by being transparent about held beliefs and values. We also understand that language is language has power. When we say the word black, when we say the word woman, poor, those are words, but those words have unmeasurable meaning. And so Foucault argued that power is knowledge and knowledge is power. He also argued that language is an instrument of power, and people have power in a society in direct proportion to their ability to participate in the various discourses that shape society. Within the narrative metaphor, the discourses of power that Foucault studied can be seen as historical, cultural, meta-narratives, as stories that have shaped and been shaped by this distribution of power in society. Dominant narratives tend to blind us to the possibilities that other narratives may offer us. So as therapists, we must listen and we must interpret, listen for that those stories, those hints, those clues, and so we can help clients to reimagine their stories.